All right, how you guys doing today? We're about to hop into the review of Proverbs chapter 29. This is part 4. The first things first, though, would love to make sure that you like the video, hit a little exit full screen, scroll just a little bit, like the video, and then full screen it back up. You feel me? Feels like forever since I've actually recorded a video. We were up like 6 videos just in the vault that I was just sitting here editing for like dang near the past week. It's almost like I've been on break, but it's lovely to be back, at least in the word for sure. All right, so we left off on verse 19. A servant will not be corrected by words, for though he understand, he will not answer. And we can actually look at the study guide for a little bit more in depth as this, right? So you can't be corrected by mere words, which is goes to show the importance of the rod or the belt, or if you're from the south, a switch, whatever you want to use to get your discipline across for a kid, right, or a servant at that. So the idea is that somebody who has an honorable servant like heart. The idea is not somebody who has an honorable servant like heart. The idea is of menial service, slave like mentality, can't be lifted above his or her present misery. That person is unlikely to be corrected by mere words. Tough life experience and discipline will be more likely to teach them. So tough life experience, bad things happening to them and so on and so forth. And then discipline in some regard, which could be physical, could be mental. Discipline happens in different ways. Regardless, that's more likely. So I actually like this quote. In this democratic age, the idea that one should have this kind of authority over someone is perhaps offensive, right? Slavery is very taboo now, at least in the American cultural sense, right? But in any age, workers can become undisciplined and unreliable if some kind of authority and discipline procedure is not established. And I actually highly agree with this. So as a college student who was a resident advisor and also an orientation leader, right, doing that, they call us paraprofessionals. We're not full-on professionals, but we're in a role that's teaching us to be professionals. And as such, you're given responsibility, but you're also still talked down on a little bit. Not talked down on, but you're not looked at as the same as somebody with an actual job or something of the sort. So I think it gives a lot of wiggle room for people to create excuse and everything, because on one sense it's here's all this responsibility, but on the other sense you guys aren't real professionals, so it's a little bit of both. And then you have people who are undisciplined and unreliable because procedure isn't established. If we're not taken seriously, it's kind of hard for us to be disciplined because you're not setting that precedent of what you want from us. Like, you're setting it, but you're not following through on it. You're like, here's this responsibility, but you're still not a professional. But here's all this responsibility, like you are a professional. Because, like I said, it just gives a lot more excuse. Like, oh, I'm not a real professional, so I don't need to. It's, oh, I messed up because I'm just not a real professional yet. It gives people the ability to make those excuses, which I don't think is good. But also, it almost undermines the authority and discipline from somebody a bit higher, because it's like, well, you keep calling us not real professionals, so am I listening to you? Do I need to? Like, what's the deal here? Like, we're kind of professionals, but we're not. Are you really my boss? And it's a lot of young people that work here, but also people that, they don't really see the vision. They don't really get the mindset of a college student, to where they understand how we need to be talked to and how we need to be treated and the things we need to hear so that we produce the best fruits that we can. But also, when you offer money and benefits to college students, a lot of people are going to be uninterested. I think that I'm rare in the sense that, like, I would almost do these jobs for free, right? I would do these jobs for free because they're just fun to me, right? And I want to do that, right? I want to be a teacher. I want to help people. So this kind of job, it's basically the same sphere: teaching, education, and then these other jobs are looked at as higher education, right? It's the same type of deal. You're still working with students and you care about people. I think the disconnect is a lot of people see the benefits and the money, and then they lose sight of the fact that you have to care about people, and it leads to some negatives. And I'd say the same in politics, right? A lot of people, they go into it with the good intentions, but then over the course of their term or whatever, things get blurred because it's not just you making the decision that you wanted to make. All that nice stuff you were talking at the beginning, it sounds nice, but it's not really feasible because you're not the only one that's got the input on it, one. But two, there's higher things in power. There's higher people in power with different visions and different morals and motives and stuff, and everything starts to get blurred. But anyway, let's move on. So you get the thing, right? Servant will not be corrected by mere words. There has to be more than just words, because words doesn't mean anything to anybody. I could tell you, hey, you have to, like, lock in, for example. You might just brush that off and say, okay, hey, I'm giving you this punishment, lock in. That means a little bit more to somebody than just lock in, right? Why do you think, if we're going to talk about slavery, why do you think they whipped people? You ain't gonna learn if you're not getting physical. It's, hey, I need more out of you. Okay. Same thing with football coaches do. Hey, you ain't giving enough effort, laps, whole team, because you're not giving effort. And you gonna run until you gonna give some effort, right? And it works because then you learn, oh shoot, there's negatives for these negatives that I'm bringing, right? There's consequences for my actions. Too many people, they don't really realize that, right? Verse 20. See that old man that's hasty in his words? There's more hope than a fool than him, right? Somebody who speaks too fast, there's hope in a fool, right? And I was telling somebody this the other day, right? If you can see what you're doing is not profitable, or like you can reflect, being reflectful is probably one of the biggest skills you can have at my age, but also like any age, being able to look back on something and think about that deeply. And I don't mean in the cringy sense, like, let's reflect on our day. What made you happy? What made you sad? More so, reflect on what you did and think about possible other outcomes, right? And that's what Proverbs talks about. Wisdom brings prudence. Prudence is basically foresight, right? Being able to look into the future, and not literally, but looking into the future and thinking, what can I do that would maximize this outcome, or what can I do that would serve God the best? Stuff around that angle versus just speaking fast and thinking about, I'm gonna do this and then whatever happens after that, it happens, right? No plan. And I'm not saying no plan is, sometimes some spontaneous things are good, like planning a trip spontaneously and just having fun once you get there. That's what we did. Went to New York City and had a little spontaneous trip once we got there, just mapping things out once we were there. But that's different than, speaking randomly at maybe a job or something. Verse 21, he that delicately brings up a servant from a child shall have him become his son at the length. And I think that basically just means he's going to have him be his son for life. That bond is going to be so strong that there shouldn't be anything. Yeah, he will have him as a son at the end. Wait. So I'm looking at these translations, right? He that delicately brings up a servant shall have him become his son at the length. That to me seems like he'll be a son at the end. He who pampers a servant from childhood will have him as a son at the end, right? So a servant from childhood, you get pampered, and it's like a son. A servant pampered from childhood would become a rebel. Okay. Whoever pampers a servant from childhood at the end will find himself his heir. That matches what I thought, but then it says the Hebrew word of this is uncertain for his heir. He who pampers his slave from childhood will find him to be a son in the end. Makes sense. One who pampers his slave from childhood in the end will find him to be rebellious. And then insolent down here, but son here. Arrogant down here. He will be a weakling in the end. And I think regardless of how this is translated, a little bit of that is true, right? So many, I can't list any, but there's like a bunch of movie plots where there's been like a servant or somebody adjacent to a family, and you treat them nice, and then they come back and they help you, and then everything's great, and you're like, you're like family because they were treated like family, even though they were on different levels, right? We can even see this with Moses and the king's thing, right? Obviously, he went to Pharaoh later and was like, free my people, but at the same time, Pharaoh raised him up, and for a good amount of time, as he knew, he was in the family, and he was chilling with them until he found out he was an Israelite, and those were his people, right? But also on the opposite side, if you pamper, right, or spoil, for a better word, your kid, then, they may tend not to be rebellious or insolent, right? We've all heard at least me being in college, I've heard the stereotype, it's always the nice, good kids with the strict parents, or, that go out and crash out because they've never had any, or they've had too much discipline, so they get to college and it's freedom, and then they go out and get alcohol poisoning and stuff like that, right? You hear those stories, but you also hear the stories of all the people that get spoiled, they never have any, or they never have any discipline, so they don't know how to work hard, or they don't really have any foresight, and they don't really think about much, and they just expect everybody else to do everything for them. And then when they get to an environment like college where they have to do everything for themselves, they don't really survive, right? So there's both sides of the spectrum. So regardless of which one this proverb is hitting at, it goes both ways. 22. An angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression, right? So somewhere in the New Testament, it's been a while since we've been there, right? It says, put away all wrath, anger, malice, strife, all that, right? So if you're angry, right, we're told put away wrath and malice. Being angry, all that's going to do is stir up strife, which is contention, which is disagreements, which is not good. It doesn't bring any fruits, right? And a furious man, basically the same thing as an angry man, is just going to abound in transgression, right? Because your vision is clouded, which is what I like so much about the verse that says we are to remain sober-minded in the New Testament, because sober-minded, it doesn't mean stay sober necessarily, but it means clear-headed, right? So letting our emotions or our flesh cloud our judgment is an easy way to not be clear-headed, right? You get so mad, you're not thinking straight. You're too tired, you're not thinking straight. You're too sad, you're not thinking straight. You even get too happy, you are not thinking straight. Like a lot of people, they say don't go to the store on an empty stomach, because when you're in there, you're thinking this will look good, this will look good, this will look good, and you buying everything you see in sight because you're like, oh, this junk looks good. You get home and you make a meal, and then you looking at half the crap you bought, and you're like, why did I buy all of this? I don't even need it. And you're sitting there confused because you're sitting there with a full cart's worth of stuff and you ain't even need half of it, right? But that's a nice way to say that when you're clouded by judgment, right, all you're gonna do is stir up strife, depending on what you are. So like angry in this case, or furious, just gonna abound in transgression, and that's not what we want. All right, that's gonna be the end of the video. Hope you guys have yourself a fantastic rest of your day. Peace.